Hello, welcome to Skills-Based Health on Demand. My name is Brad Brummel, and I'm here with Kim Goforth, and this series is brought to you by DESE, Missouri Healthy Schools, and MOSHAPE. Today we are jumping into our instructional strategy series with the strategy role play. And like I said, my name is Brad Brummel. I'm the Health and PE Coordinator for Springfield Public Schools, and I'm here with Kim Goforth. Hi, Kim.
Hello, how are you today, Brad?
Doing excellent. Are you ready to discuss a little role play today?
Let's do it. Let's get started.
So our key learning objective for the viewer is that at the end of the video that you would be able to plan a learning activity that uses role play for students to be able to practice their health skills. If you haven't been able to check out the why skills-based health or the making the shift video, we would highly encourage you to start there. But once you've bought into helping students learn health skills, role play is a great strategy, and we're gonna share why. We also wanted to provide you a training guide so that way you can capture your learning. You can download it and find the link in the YouTube description, or you can print and use it to write and take your notes that way. There are helpful links, and so you'll want access to the digital version of the training guide, but this is for your use. And Kim, are you ready to jump right in?
Let's talk a little bit about why we could use and should use this role play strategy to talk about our health skills that we want students to start to use. So a big why is it allows students multiple opportunities to have various steps just on one health skill. And so when we look at some of the training guides later in this particular video, we'll look at some sub skills. And so through a role play situation, you can kind of hit several of those skills in one played out act. And so I think that it provides just multiple opportunities to practice multiple steps of a health skill. It also provides an opportunity for students to practice those health skills in a little bit lower stakes environment instead of just being out there and encountering some of these situations in their world, in their life practices. And so kind of bringing it down to a low stakes level that we can be pretty vulnerable and ask kids to act some things out. And it also prompts students to practice the language that they will need to carry into some of those real life scenarios. And so it's a little bit safer environment for them to say some things that they just, you're not going to get it right the first time. And so we might as well provide this safe opportunity through a skit or a role play to say those things. And then one big one, it offers some fun. And so it's one of those, not the standard teacher talk type lesson or instructional practice. And so it offers a lot of fun for kids to be vulnerable. Some of those kids that have the learning language of movement or the real kinesthetic to get up and be dramatic and that flair for the drama and that kind of thing. So it offers some fun for kids. So it's a real good strategy to use just in general.
Yeah, and it should provide a high level of engagement too. We all want our students to be engaged, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes, Kim, our health content can be pretty heavy at times.
Yeah.
It can hit hard.
Right.
And so if we can counter that with a little bit more of a fun instructional strategy, I think that can be impactful.
Yeah, for sure.
Now that you've heard the why, we're going to just discuss some tips and tricks on using role play. It's important that you assign very clear roles, and that you sometimes even provide the opportunity on who is who, and that you also collaborate with the students on providing clear rules about, what is appropriate for this role play and what is inappropriate. And I have found through my teaching experience that it actually is helpful to go ahead and communicate what would be inappropriate, and let's just air it out. And that way we don't see it. We're all on the same page, because sometimes teachers are scared to talk about what would be inappropriate, but a lot of times those teachers end up having to talk about it anyways because it actually happens in class. So you might as well get it out and talk about it. And then let the students be silly. It's okay if your classroom is not quiet. I think sometimes that's like I don't know, a stigma with secondary classrooms that a quiet classroom is a good classroom, and that shouldn't be the case. We need to change that perspective, and the students should be allowed to be silly, and that's part of the learning experience. Um, we want to make sure that if we want our students to be successful, we can provide scripts, especially if this is a newer instructional strategy for your classroom. That'll really help them feel more comfortable and safe in diving into a role play. And then if you want to provide the students the reflection opportunity, let them record those skits so that they can watch them. Because especially if I would recommend doing these in smaller group or partner settings rather than whole group where one pair is doing the role play in front of everyone, because that can be intimidating, um, especially if this is a newer strategy. So it's going to be hard for you as a teacher to watch all of the skits and role plays at the same time. So allow those students to record and rewatch so that they can reflect and maybe even submit for a formative assessment. And then another thing I think I would advise would be is to use team building activities within your classroom as a culture builder and to build class cohesion. If you do that on a normal basis, these role playing situations, your students are going to be willing to take risk and feel more comfortable. There's going to be more trust. Than if you don't spend any time with team building, class building. So, Kim, you got any others?
Yeah, just I was going to hit on that too. It's a great has to be set up in some of your classroom structures and routines. I wouldn't do role play on the first week of school, but yeah, really partner your kids well and get to know their personalities individually before you jump into this role play strategy. Yeah.
So now access your training guide, and we would invite you to complete the opening activity. After we've discussed the why role play can be impactful for students practicing health skills and some tips and tricks, what's your aha moment, or what is something that you want to remember? Capture that thought on your training guide. Question 1. So next we are going to model and discuss a practice opportunity of what role play could look like in a health education classroom. And so we're going to do that by modeling a practice opportunity that will help students learn self-management, which is standard 7. And so remember, if you watched our deep dive into standard 7 video, we talked about how this standard has 2 components. One is demonstration of health practices, and the second is personal responsibility. And so Kim's going to focus on an activity that is about personal responsibility, and specifically the performance indicator, working cooperatively as an advocate for improving personal, family, and community health. So
Perfect.
Kim,
Yep.
you ready to share?
I am. Let's kind of get started with this particular teaching progression. And so, like Brad said, the personal responsibility piece of this standard, this is just on personal responsibility for grades 9-12. And most of the teaching progressions that you'll see in the RMC skill guides are a more linear look at things. And this one is one of my favorites. It's very cyclical. And so it kind of like rotates because we have to constantly identify what's my personal responsibility in this particular situation. Let me choose a skill that I want to focus on. I want to make it a habit and then reflect on it. And we don't get it right the first time all the time. And so to know and to teach kids that this is kind of a process. As adults, we're still trying to figure out, our personal responsibilities in each scenario as we navigate life too. And so this is the teaching progression. It is by steps, but it is very cyclical. So I just wanted to kind of put that out there. So if we identified just this step 1 to focus on and to kind of model a lesson, be mindful because these other steps will sneak in too as we look at this opportunity to look at role play. So if we just look at step 1 on identifying personal responsibilities, I want you to look at some of the sub skills. And so it's for these high school kids defining what responsibility is, duty, a chore, responsibility. So some of those terms that can kind of coexist together, but really defining what responsibility is, and then identifying what my personal responsibilities are. And you kind of get with secondary students, is that your job to worry about, or kind of stay in your lane kind of conversations? What is my personal responsibility to this situation? And then analyzing a need for those personal responsibilities, the why behind how does this connect to their personal health. And so looking at some of the guiding questions, this will also come out in the role play. But what does it mean to be responsible for my own health? And then when you think back to the performance indicator and my family's health and my community's health. And so really having them analyze how and starting to make those connections on how some of this role play could impact their own health. And then how could some of those responsibilities change in the future. And so if you're dealing with middle school students, how could these decisions affect when you're in high school? And then high school, how can you carry that on into your adult life? And so if we kind of look at some of these things, when we think about giving kids practice opportunities through role play, we think back to those sub skills. And then I always think of the statement, you had one job. And so you can kind of open this conversation with what was this person's one job, and remember some of the tips and tricks that Brad shared, that, keep it narrow, keep it kind of low stakes, so it's a little bit more safe. And so what were these people's one job, is to get the line straight on the road. It was to make a medal that said first place or third place, whatever that medal is. It looks kind of gold to me. But anyway, so if you can open that up with what was the personal responsibility that these folks had? You had one job. And so you can kind of keep it light there with that. And then as you move into some of the instructional practice of role play, you can set up some role play situations and remember some of those tips again. It was to provide them a script. And so if you think about that font looks kind of funny, but the acted out part, and you should always give them a goal. And so here's just some personal responsibilities that teens may need to be engaged in their lives. But in the skit that you are writing for them, you give them the wrong kind of responsibility. And the script would say something like, your job is to load the dishwasher. And so you can give them the wrong script about you should put all the plates on the top and just lay them flat, and then you should put all the silverware in the top thing and not the silverware thing, and you should try to, you shouldn't put soap in it because it might overflow, and you don't really need to lock it. And you can give all of the wrong information. And if you look at this teen budget worksheet, you can have them act out, I'm going to not budget for college because I'm going to just start my own lawn mowing business. And how am I going to budget for that? And food, I'd rather spend money on fast food than, meal plan at home, and kind of give them all of the kind of the wrong direction that you want kids to move and act out. The distracted driving, you can say you should be texting your friend to let them know you're going to be late. You should turn up your jams and find your iTunes. And so you can take any scenario that you see here, but provide a script with, wow, the wrong kind of business that they need to be engaged in. And then the second part of this practice opportunity then is to come back and talk about how will that impact, like how did that whole situation make you feel? Like you were acting out some things that were not comfortable. Why were they not comfortable? What was the right practice that could have impacted your health for later, your family's health? And you can steer that through any content you wish. You can talk about the distracted driving scenario. What if they were drinking? It mentioned they were drinking, so you can kind of have that second part of that, like a post-production. And so then in that goal for post-reflection, it could be, what impact did that have? And then have them reenact through role play again, answering some of these questions. Wow, in order to stay safe on the road, I need to learn how to not be a distracted driver or passenger. And so let them fill in these blanks through conversation, and then they re-record or reenact the same scenarios through this role play. And so that's just one opportunity that they could have. But again, if you think back to the cycle of identifying their personal responsibility in that role play, and then they have to choose that skill or strategy, and then they still come back and they circle and reflect, can they put this into practice and make it a habit? So again, it's multiple steps that you have through the role play, and then they still have time to reflect, and then it can cycle again so they can reenact, embracing a healthier skill in their life. So that's just one opportunity to kind of get all the steps there in the cycle through role play. Brad, thoughts?
Are plates not supposed to go on the top rack?
No,
Oh my goodness.
no, do not. And they have to go like this. And do
Oh
you
my
put your
goodness.
silverware like tines of a fork down, or do you put them up? That's a big question. Big debate.
My wife's happy if they go from the sink to the dishwasher, Kim. So
That's fair. That
it
is fair.
sounds like me and my wife need some post-production talk,
That's
but
right. Yes.
that's okay.
Yes. I will give you all the time to reflect.
Appreciate that. So now that Kim has modeled how she selected her standard and a great practice opportunity, now we would invite you to do the same thing. So the first part of that would be finding the practice section on your training guide and complete part one standard selection. So here you're selecting what standard you want to focus on. And if you even want to go a step farther, you can select a performance indicator. And if you want to, you can even use a RMC Health Skill Guide to check out the sub skills that are included within that standard. Next, we would ask that you take it a step further. So now go into the designing and planning stage. So now you are starting to think about what would that teaching progression look like? What steps do we need to teach? What practice opportunities are you going to provide students? How are you going to use role play to provide that practice opportunity? And what other specifics, what other parts of that activity do you want to remember? And use this part two of your training guide to capture those thoughts. So as we reflect on that activity, Kim, I am super excited about including that in our SPS curriculum because I love the you had one job part. I think students would really get excited about that part. I think that translates well and speaks kind of the same social media language that they do.
Right.
I also think it could be fun to ask students what, because I know one of the sub skills was identifying personal responsibilities,
Mhm.
and maybe asking students, what one job do you have? Like, what's your one job?
Right.
And how would that, what would the picture of, if one of these pictures on social media was about you, what would it look like?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that would be a different instructional strategy. But I love that you had one job approach, and I was super excited about that.
Yeah. Good. It's their language for sure.
Mhm.
And you can find some fun pictures that it's kind of their hook to get them engaged. And um, but I will say this, the second question talks about what challenges may you experience, and in role play can be pretty tricky for two reasons that I'm thinking. One are the kids that are kind of the kids that don't do well in speech class. They have a little stage fright. They don't want to get up, and they're not the most extroverted students that we have, and they won't portray the meat of a skit that you're trying to get to. And so to really build that culture of safety within your classroom, I think is paramount before you can engage in role play. So that's one challenge that you have to be mindful of. I think another challenge with role play, when we play out scenarios, you know, be it the personal responsibility standard or maybe something content wise that's a little bit heavier about distracted driving, maybe abstinence, and how you can work through putting off sexual activity until you're ready, like heavy content conversations. I think that culturally there are some students that won't find it wrong to act out a certain way if you're trying to portray a more safe, but then culturally that is their life. It's okay to maybe engage in tobacco use. I was in a training once with some folks that were on that they taught health on a reservation, and tobacco use is started at a very young age there. And so if you act out a scenario through role play, it can be a challenge. Some kids normal is that way for a reason. So I think those things could be a challenge. And so you have to really be mindful about those things before you start to engage in that role play.
And Kim, to add on to your comment about team building, I'm recalling on the training that me and you went through on role play. And before we actually jumped into the learning with role play, we did a role play team builder that had nothing to do with the content, to where we had to put on some type of hat or costume, and it had nothing to do with the learning task yet. And so
Right.
if you introduce that role play in a easy way, in a fun way, in a team builder way, that also, I think, could help you have success with your students through
Yeah.
the instructional part as well. So
Great idea. Great idea. I forgot about that.
now that we've reflected, I should have brought my hat.
Yeah, right.
Now that we've reflected, please do the same and find the learning activity reflections part of your training guide and complete questions 1 and 2. Capture a thought of something that you are excited about your activity, and think about and brainstorm about what potential challenges could you face and how are you going to handle that challenge. So we just want to thank you for joining us. We want to make sure that you're aware of the other videos in this instructional strategy series, as well as our National Health Standards series and our 2 intro videos. So just wanted to make sure you were aware. And we just, again, thank you for joining us for Skills-Based Health on Demand. And a big thanks to DESE, Missouri Healthy Schools, MOSHAPE, and my partner in crime, Kim.
That's
Thank
right.
you.
Thanks, everybody.